You're live.
Okay, great. Thank you for everybody coming. Get this meeting started. And do the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do a quick roll call. Drew Martin. Phil Winkler.
Dale Cook.
Marty Tar.
Bill Zolper, Town Manager.
And then we want to go ahead and do adoption of the agenda. Anybody have any questions on that?
I move that we adopt the agenda as written.
Second. Done.
And we're going to take a vote. All in favor.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions, any negatives?
Any public comments right now? Nope. And then we want to go to the approval of the minutes. Anyone wants to make a motion to approve those?
I move that we approve the minutes as written.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approved. Okay, so first item
All right.
that Dale was going to lead off on.
I would like to, our chairperson has resigned as chair. I understand he's going to stay on the committee, but he resigned as chair and has recommended that Drew Martin take over for him. I'd like to make a motion that we accept as a temporary chair Drew Martin.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great.
That was everybody.
All right, moving right along. So, and again, Jim will be on the committee still, because we definitely need his expertise, that's for sure. That's the most important part. So I guess first will be the presentation from Beacon Engineering for proposal for flood mitigation on Reed Avenue.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could just interject with some things. So the continuing flooding on Reed Avenue on the Bayside has been a continuing problem. Out of 4 people that sit here, 3 of you actually experience it on a monthly basis and have lived there, some of you for years. Some time ago, working with RV, we tried to do some things with the riprap, and then we took out the actual flaps that were in the pipes to evaluate and see what would happen. Since then, there was guidance given to us by the Infrastructure Committee to get some opinions on some other systems that may or may not work before we put the flaps back in. So we went ahead and had 2 engineering firms. One of them is getting ready to present right now, Beacon, Bob Palmer. He spent numerous amount of time down there at the street, looking at the street, talking to me, finding out what was going on with the flooding, some history of what had happened there with Center of the Inland Bays, putting some of the structures in there. And then we also have RV, who's been working on this project for some time, at least in the 3 years that I've been here. So that's how we are here today, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Bill.
Good afternoon. Since this is my first rodeo with the Infrastructure Committee, I'm not sure whether I should face you, ladies and gents, or the audience, or just kind of work back and forth. So
Whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
all right, very good. Well, for the record, my name is Bob Palmer. I'm with Beacon Engineering, and as Mr. Zolper said, he contacted us to kind of get our thoughts on what we saw and how we felt about what was happening there. And we put together a report, which I'm sure you folks have and have probably already read. I'm not planning on going through that report in great detail. What I thought I would do is offer some commentary and perspective about why I wrote what I wrote. And just kind of give you guys a little bit more insight as to, the kind of the thoughts and perspective. When we look at a project, we look at it we look at it pragmatically, and, Dewey Beach in and of itself is a low-lying coastal town, and it has a tendency to flood. And with the very low relief that you have on Reed Avenue, it makes it incredibly difficult for a gravity system to work. Bill was telling me that, and I'm aware from work with some other consultants over the years, that you guys have at least one other outfall that's a pressurized system, a pump station, if you will, that collects the storm water and conveys it somewhere else to eliminate the flooding in that part of the town. And so in discussions with Bill, and in light that coastal towns have a tendency to flood, I explained to Bill some perspective that we had for some work that I did as a very young engineer with the city of Crisfield. And I don't know that it's really appropriate for this conversation, but suffice to say, there's parts of the highest elevation in the city of Crisfield is the Pitcher's Mound at the high school, which is an elevation of 3. And they have a series of levees and floodgates and pump stations, and they still flood from time to time because that's what coastal towns do. So in talking with Bill about the expectations, and my dismal painting of the picture that coastal towns flood, what was the expectation? Are we looking for a street that, during the design storm event, are we looking at a dry street except for gutter spread, or is some level of flooding tolerant? And if that flooding is tolerable, to what extent? Bill told me about the flooding that you guys have had on Coastal Highway, and Coastal Highway is closed. As a matter of fact, I think it closed this summer during one of the storms that rolled through. And so, with that in mind, Bill sort of indicated that an amount of flooding is tolerable so long as there's a minimal risk of property damage, that the floodwaters don't stay there for days and weeks and months, days and weeks like they sometimes do. And so we took a look at it from a relatively low tech perspective. I ran some very crude calculations to get a order of magnitude understanding of what I thought the runoff to the area was, and I included that in the report. And based on those preliminary findings and absent of reviewing the hydraulic calculations and studies that were done to size the outfall facility that you guys have at Reed Avenue, and from observation that Bill had conveyed, it seemed to me that maybe 3 36-inch pipes might not necessarily be the best solution for the low-lying conditions that we have there. And what I mean by that is, Bill indicated that at least 2 of the inline check valves that were installed, they were subject to blockage, whether it be by sand or debris, that you were constantly battling. And that sort of led me to run the calculations I ran. And basically, under gravity conditions, 136-inch culvert would convey the peak runoff rate. Now, that's a lot of gross assumptions that go into that statement, and those assumptions may have been proven to be invalid in the analysis that was done to size the 336s. But suffice to say, one culvert should allow the floodwaters to dissipate and give you the scour velocities to allow some sort of a lower tech, whether it's a flat valve, flat gate, or inline check valve. It would give that sort of an asset an opportunity to succeed. With all of this runoff, with a lot of the runoff coming from Coastal Highway, DelDOT's going to have a say in it, and Bill sent that off to DelDOT to review, and subject to final engineering and calculations. That's really our recommendation, is to run with close off 2 of the culverts and install either an inline valve or a corrosion resistant flat valve. given the low head conditions that are present, there's not a lot of between the street grade and the water surface elevations in the bay. There, in my opinion, there really isn't enough back pressure, if you will, to make the lesser expensive flat valve function reliably. It will likely not always close. Yes, sir.
Is that flap valve, you're talking about an external valve or
Correct.
internal?
It would be an external valve. It's basically, the valve that I represented in the brochures that I provided, that valve, basically, it's all constructed out of high density polyethylene and with a stainless steel hinge. And basically it's a
Every external
door.
valve that they put in there hasn't worked.
okay,
You know, the external flap initially got jammed by sand.
sure.
And then they tried, I forget who it was, the duckbill.
Yeah,
thing.
I saw those in the pictures.
And
yeah.
that didn't work either. Okay.
Yeah.
Joyce.
Yeah. So that was one of the options that I recommended in the way of some sort of a backwater, or back, tide gate, if you will. The other is an inline check valve, but it would be, entirely elastomeric device. It's made out of different polymers, EPDM, HDPE, to give it its structure and rigidity, manufactured by Red Valve. And those valves, their literature says they open with 1 inch of differential pressure, but realistically it's in the 6-inch range. And so if you provide the single valve, all of the water from the street will run through that valve. They give you a greater potential for success with scouring at the exit of the valve to help refluidize the sediment that the tide washed in during that storm. It may work, it may not work, but it's a low-tech, low-cost solution that, I think with reasonable maintenance, I think it has an opportunity for success. Again, no hydraulic calculations to really speak of have been run other than to get a basic understanding of the order of magnitude of storms in this storm runoff in this watershed. Someone thought 336s was a good idea, and it may be, and that may be what's required in order to mitigate the runoff conditions to meet the DELDOT's requirements for coastal highway. Those conversations haven't happened, and if any of these solutions are selected, those discussions really need to take place to ink it. But those are the solutions. We also looked at extending the pipe out into deeper water, as shallow as the bay is. I didn't take that solution very far just because of the cost that I saw with adding pile vents and stabilizing the pipe. It essentially looked like the outfalls that Rehoboth Beach has, where they've got the pipes that run out into the ocean with the pile vents. It would look something like that next to the pier there. The only other component of the of my evaluation that I think is really noteworthy is I included provisions for a small, basically a drainage pump. It's nowhere near the capacity or the complexity of the lift stations that the stormwater lift station that the town currently has. It was an attempt to, and when you read through the report, it was a stepwise. If we try this, and if we like this, then we move to the next step, or if we don't like this, or it doesn't work the way we think, move to the next step. Install a gabion to kind of close off, to create a plunge pool that's more easily maintained, to mitigate the sands from the bay coming back against the valve, sort of thing. But the pump that I installed isn't a conveyance pump. It's kind of like the sump pump in your basement. You get a little bit of water in the basement. Sump pump runs for hours, gets rid of the water. It's not to keep the basement dry. And this pump, based on the persistent flooding that Bill conveyed we estimated what the volumetric amount of water that would land in that flooded area. And at 150 gallons per minute, it basically would dewater that part of that watershed within a 24-hour period. What doesn't get out by the floodgate in between the tide events, the rest of it would be conveyed by the pump. So it's not intended to meet any particular design storm. It's, like I said, it's just a dewatering pump to dry to help dry the street a little more quickly. And that's about it.
So that last design, you're talking about a box at the end of the pipe? It's not allowing backflow, or you still just have a valve on the end of the pipe with a inline pump?
Sure. So step one would be to install a valve, and temporarily, it could be permanent, but place plugs on the ends of the 236-inch culverts that we're going to block off. Install the valve, monitor its progress, make sure that the valve is maintained in a clear condition, and if that solves the problem and the scour velocities that are built up by the runoff that runs through that valve out into the bay, if that suits the town's needs and the town's happy with the flooding that happens on the backside of that valve because the storm came at high tide and the flood waters couldn't get out, if all of that is acceptable, well, then you stop. If you have either excessive sediment against the valve that the valve can't continue to clean itself, or the floodwaters are not acceptable because they're not getting through the valve fast enough in between the tide events. If you have a sediment problem, then rework the plunge pool at the end of the outfall and install either a gabion wall or bring more riprap in and kind of close off that that lagoon that is that exists in an effort to try to keep the sands from moving up against the valve. If the floodwaters are not, and if the receding floodwaters are not fast enough, then that would be the solution where a pump would be installed. And I picked a small pump, again, for dewatering purposes, and in order, in mind of cost, I picked a small pump that I feel could be installed in that existing box where the street collection system runs into the three 36-inch pipes. With that size of a box, we ought to be able to get a small 4-inch pump in there, and it would run for however long it ran until the street was dry.
I have a question.
Sure.
Do you think the pump would ever stop running? You're talking about a small pump in a box that's
Sure.
pretty much at or below sea level.
Sure.
Would it ever stop, and you think it would just burn itself up?
Well, every pump will burn itself
Well,
up
I know.
eventually. So it depends on the style valve you select. If we go with the flat valve, which is really the least expensive style valve, and I've heard that you've had a bite out of that apple and it didn't work very well, so maybe we just abandon that and we go back to the inline valve, the Tide Flex, the red valve brand valve, and that will be installed at the very end of the pipe so that it is accessible. A man doesn't have to get down into that box and clean the debris out from it. And if there is sediment that does blind the valve off so that it can't open properly, a man can get it, wade in there, personnel can wade in there and clean the valve. Those valves can also be pried open so that, if debris that comes from the street gets blocked up against the valve, those valves can be pried open so that debris can be, for the most part, removed without having to, again, gain access to the pipe. But by going with a valve like that, the Tide Flex or the red valves, they have a tendency to have a more positive seal so long as there's nothing in the seat that keeps the valve open. So as long as we have a positive seal, then yes, that pump will ultimately shut down because it will satisfy the floats, and it will just wait until either infiltration from other parts of the system with the ebbing and flowing of the tides through the sands, or the next storm event comes.
And where would it be, the pump would push the water where? Just
Right.
right off the end of
Yeah.
the street and back into the bay?
Correct. I would just run a small diameter pipe overboard within that same outfall structure area.
So to clarify, what this pump is doing is pumping street water
Correct.
over the berm and into the bay. Okay.
Correct.
Good.
Yes, sir.
We do have a lot of water that comes down from McKinley Street, comes down Hayden, sometimes that way, especially when it rains. And a pump like this, if it's decided, may be able to handle some of that water.
What was your, I've forgotten, what was your recommendation, whether it be inline or at the end of the line valve?
My preference is the inline valve installed at the end of the pipe so that it's accessible.
At the end of the pipe?
Yes, sir. Correct.
The southernmost pipe or another pipe?
I would select the pipe that has the highest relative elevation. Each pipe has a slightly different elevation. Outfall elevation, I would pick the highest pipe because inches matter when you're battling moving sands. I wouldn't pick the one that has the lowest relative elevation because that's the most, intuitively, that's the most likely pipe to be blinded off.
And when we talk about this pump of pumping the rainwater that's there, what is the rate, the gallon per minute rate of this thing?
Subject to final design, I guessed at 150 gallons per minute. And the reason why I picked 150 gallons per minute is because the area of the floodwaters that Bill had shown me from other systems and other storm events, and I printed out.
I sent him pictures from the flooding up almost to Route 1.
Yeah, we're talking about a foot deep, 100 feet wide, and 600 feet long thing. You know how many gallons that is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
About 150,000 gallons.
At the least. The fact is, as Bill's pointed out before too, when the tide goes down, the water drains very, very quickly.
Right.
That's what's doing it.
Right. And the point of this pump is really only if the citizenry are averse to the rainwater lingering. During your normal tide events, I would agree that that the street rainwater would disappear relatively quickly. But when you have your nor'easters or hurricanes, depending on how much water they dump and depending on how much water the wind pushes into the inlet, sometimes high tides have a tendency to be, or low tides have a tendency to be non-existent, and it would be during those events that the pump would really.
And then this would be an electric pump too.
Correct. So we would have to get power out to that location, and again, the reason for picking a low capacity, long duration pump, if you pick a single phase pump, then the cost of the power is less. The cost to get the power there is less.
Oh, that's clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
So right now, our biggest problem, again, plain transparency, we both live on Reed and deal with it on a daily basis, is the water flowing back through the drains right into the street. It's not coming over the berm. And this fall has been, I don't know if it's a lot of high tides. I don't know, but this fall we've had quite a bit of it. But if you go down there now, the street may be dry, but if you look at the drains, the water's to the top of the drains. So as soon as that high tide starts to come in, it pushes it right in. So it quickly floods the street. So there's got to be some way in that plan to get that water out of the pipes when it drains out. It does drain the street, but it still just stays there.
Sure.
And it stayed there all summer long. That's why I think a pump is important.
Sure.
So how soon can you get it installed?
Bill gave a deadline of this spring. Subject to contractor availability. The products that we've specified are, you know, basically off the shelf items. So it could be done depending upon the permit pathway and the order of magnitude of analysis that DelDOT would require for this little mousetrap.
You all get DelDOT to do it.
I asked Bill why, you know, you guys should partner up with them, but it's not on their radar.
How about the gates that were removed? Bill, do you know what happened to the gates that were removed?
So I think RV should address that when they have their presentation.
Oh, you don't know?
They took them out. I don't know if they still have them or whether they got rid of them.
We paid $60,000 for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Appreciate it. Yeah, you can stick around, sure.
So next, we get a great presentation from Remington and Vernick on the same issue we're having with Regal.
This is a custom trail. I got some handouts for you guys.
Thanks for having us, guys. We truly appreciate your time. My name is Chris Fazio. I'm an Executive Vice President and Director of Engineering for Delaware Operations at Remington and Vernick Engineers. Kevin Zielinski, my associate, giving some presentations out for everybody. In the back is Jody Bacher. Jody's with Standard Pipe Services. Jody is with a contracting company. We want to give you kind of the best of both worlds with the engineering and the construction to back it up, to give you a plausible idea of what is we think is really feasible out there. So that being said, I'll invite Kevin on up to give the presentation, and we'll answer questions as they come up.
Thanks, Ken.
All right, Chris. Excuse me, folks, we'll give them some handouts. A lot of paper. We still use paper. But we also have a PowerPoint that I'm going to show you. So just giving some reference material here that we'll be referencing during the presentation. And part of my presentation, working with Bill and Jim as long as I have on this matter, is a little bit of history. I promise that's it. Oh, we're good. All right, so thank you, Kate. So again, we're here to talk about the Reed Avenue outfall repair project. We want to go over a quick review, update, and recommendations. Give a little bit of history for those that may not know all of it. If you do, then it is a good documentary. But as you know, working since, 2019, I think we started going back and forth, under the phase one stormwater management mapping that Remington and Vernick did. We did a pilot area where we did we started out with the northern part of town, where we field located and mapped all of the stormwater infrastructure within the town of Dewey. And then recommendations on the condition of the pipe, its status, if it's okay, should it be replaced, should it be relined, or somewhere in between. While that was happening, I believe it was RK&K did a design, and they were actually under construction where they put in another junction box at the end of Reed, and then put out the 3 flared ends. As a matter of fact, when we were doing our field work under phase one, they were doing the punch list item, I think, putting the dune back and basically doing the final closeout of that installation. So our work, and I have a slide that's going to get to that point. Our work went up to the existing junction box, and that was new construction. So that was, we're not touching it. It was brand new. So we had field located and ultimately relined everything on Reed, which were dual 18s and 15s from Coastal Highway all the way down.
Oh, so you guys did the relining with the thing that went in there?
We did the relining on Reed as well as McKinley and.
I know that being done, but I didn't know that was you guys doing it. That interesting.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to kind of give a little bit of a background on what came to this point.
Not the end. We did not design this.
We did not design
I
the,
know it's in the pipe. That was not a part of what the work
I
we
know,
did.
yeah.
right.
That was
Actually,
okay,
that was
okay.
new construction. It was being done or wrapping up as we started the project for the phase one. And I know on the agenda, we're talking about phase two today as well.
Cool.
So there was starting to become problems. There were problems with that area, as we all know today. And Bill and Jim had asked me, actually, it was right before Bill started, Jim had asked me, and then Bill quickly after said, hey, can you take a look at this while you're down there and, see what you think? We quickly found that the valves entering the bay were no longer working properly. And I actually have a slide to that effect. Can you go to the next slide, Kate? Next slide.
You have a clicker up there. I can do it for you.
It's,
Ah.
I moved it down.
The guy from Beacon took our clip.
Am I holding this wrong?
Try to put, make sure it's the form. The form it on.
Kate, can you go to this slide?
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you
thanks.
don't mind. Thank you.
Maybe it needs it definitely.
It's working.
Like a TV remote. When the valves stopped working, it caused sand and water to wash into the pipes during high tide. It was verified that the pipes are partially under sand, causing backups and flooding. One of the things that we recommended doing was excavating the sand below the invert of the pipes, which was done ultimately. Removal of the 3 outfall valves and the installation of a coffer dam around the 3 pipe locations. After the silt was removed, the area was stabilized before the installation of an underwater barrier using riprap R5 and/or R6 stone around those 3 pipes in order to protect the area from further erosion. I actually have a map that's going to show that.
Now, I'm sorry. I have documentary evidence and photo evidence showing that that southernmost pipe worked continuously. I also measured the floodwater on the street, and not once during 2 years after Center for Inland Bays completed that project did bay water encroach on the street. Bay water has a specific gravity of 1.024 or so, whereas rainwater is 1.002. I was out there with my hygrometer every time the street flooded from rain, and at no time did bay water encroach through those valves.
Well, you're right. The southernmost one did actually operate, and I think it's still operating somewhat today.
It's not in there today.
No, the valves were all removed with the
I know.
intention of putting external valves at the end of the pipes. So the approach was reconfiguration of the riprap, removing the inline valves because they were rusted shut. They were, and I have pictures of this in the slide, which is actually just added. Katie helped me out with it. She was terrific. It's not in your packet now, but it will be online for you to look at on your website. The southernmost outfall was moving water. However, the other 2 had silted up and actually had shut. When we did look at it, and again, this was not our design. This was something that we were asked to look at because it was new construction during the course of our phase 1 piping work. We feel that the 3 outfalls were probably more for redundancy because you only have about 2 foot of fall, maybe a little over 2 feet of fall from.
While that is true, the main reason for those valves was to prevent bay water coming into the street. And they worked for 2 years until they were removed. Ever since you all removed those pipes, it has flooded at least 40 times.
which we were asked to remove, and we complied. This commission asked us to remove them, and we did after we reconfigured the riprap, which I have a slide that I'll detail for you upcoming, with the intention of putting external HDPE gate valves at the end where you can monitor, inspect, and I've always said this, wash, rinse, and repeat. How many times have we been talking about this? You need to vac it out at least twice a year. You need to clean it out. One of the things that we did was in addition to reconfiguring the baffle system, as we call it, to try to mitigate and keep sand away from the throat or the inlets of those
And
outfalls,
that didn't
we-
work.
we created a depressed area, what I call a depressed or tub area, because the riprap stone went right up to the inverts of those flared ends, those plastic flared ends. You have 3 corrugated plastic pipes that come out, 336 inch, which I'm sure you know. The stone went right up to the inverts of those pipes. We created what I call a tub or low-lying area so that any sand that got through those 3 breakwaters, and I only had 1, now there's 3, that got through there would collect there. During high tide, those valves would close to keep the bay water out. And then when the tide fell, any rainwater event could then be able to drain out. We had every intention of putting those valves back in. They were on order, and we were told to cancel the order, which we did. And we're going to monitor that situation, which we did. First thing I said was, what's going to keep the bay out? Because even if you put a pump in, you still got to shut the bay out and pump it out, because it never permeates the dune. It stays behind that dune. We know that. So it doesn't flow over the dune. So, next slide, Dave.
No, I just wanted to just go through it because you're explaining what didn't work. What do you think will work? This is where we want to go.
Right, well, ultimately, if you want me to, I had a history lesson here, but if you want me to cut right to the
It's up
chase,
to
I
the
will.
commission. It's up to the.
It's up to you. That's what we'd like to do.
Whatever you want us to do.
Do your presentation as you plan on doing it.
Okay.
That's what I'd like to see anyway.
So referencing and again, all the other areas where you have an outfall, you have a single outfall, except for Reed. You have 3, there was designed 3 outfalls. We believe that was, and I think Beacon, this fellow here alluded to it earlier, you only have 2 feet of fall. It's almost flat for that run from Coastal Highway down to the end of Reed. Those pipes in low tide are underwater. At least 50% are underwater all the time. In fact, after that work was done, you had a nor'easter, right, Bill, came in and 2 of those things were clogged right off the bat. So one of the things we looked at was rearranging the riprap. We extended that out. In fact, that riprap didn't even go along the pier. It does now. We wrapped that all the way around and created 3 breakwaters instead of 1. Remove the inline valves for a couple of reasons. Number 1, they corroded. They literally corroded shut. They weren't fully shut, which is why they work. They shut it partially. And I have photos to show you. They're in the PowerPoint that you'll see. They corroded to a point where they were maybe 10% open, so it was letting some flow come out.
No bay water came in. Therefore, it was closed.
Okay.
It was working as designed.
Again, you need to have valves.
Right.
We don't recommend, and I know we were backed by other independent folks that said putting them inside the junction box where A, you cannot see them to monitor them, and B, where you will have silted up or debris come in through a nor'easter that will prevent them from operating properly. We said remove those and put them on the
And I
outside.
have the clicker to work. I'm moving the head so they can see what they look like here.
These are the inline valves that were removed. I'm sorry, folks, they're not in your PowerPoint. Thank you, Katie, help me put these in. Bill, these are the ones that I had sent you. Okay? These were the valves that were removed. These were corroded shut. You can see, and probably the one on the very right might be the southern one, to your point, sir, where water was coming and going. The fact that you have valves was never in question. You need valves. It was having them inside a junction box in line was the issue. We proposed, put the head up. We'll come back.
First time I've seen one.
Right, back up. This is what we were proposing to do. It's a West Atlantic Tech Corporation. It's an HDPE flat valve. It's made to fuse on the end of the existing pipe that you have now. Plastic on plastic. It's on the outside where you can see it. You can vac out the sand if you need to make sure that they operate properly and that they close when the bay is high tide to keep the bay out, to his point. And they'll open during a rain event when there's low tide to let the water out.
So
You
it is,
don't have enough, sorry?
I'm sorry, it is automatic? This isn't a manual
Yes.
pump?
Yes,
Okay.
it's a stainless steel, it's what he spec.
Can I make one little comment?
Sure.
Which may alleviate some of the confusion here. I think what the gentleman is saying is correct, that when those inline valves were first installed, things seemed to improve and they did work. What happened is they were constructed, they were not, they were metallic basically, and they were not non-corrosive. And so over time, over that 2-year period, even though they're kind of working, they ended up being stuck with the silt and they rusted out. And they rusted in position to wherever they were, and they stopped working. Yes, they kept the bay out, but they didn't know the bay were out.
Not in a timely fashion.
And so that's what was happening. And you had one that was still operating because it was rusted in a somewhat open position, which kept some of the bay water out, but allowed some of the stormwater to trickle out. And when we cut them out, they were in horrible shape, and we did not keep them.
Right.
We weren't advised to keep them, we weren't asked to keep them. There was no reason to keep them because they were damaged, and they got more damaged when we had to cut them out. So.
They ended up destroying them, trying to get them out. But the intent was not to remove them and leave them off. The intent was to remove them and put them on the outside of
And
the
that
pipe.
was with the understanding that then the next stage would be to replace them with valves at the end. I think even, like I said, if you reconsider an inline, Mr. Palmer was saying, was that, having it at the end, you can't, putting them in, you can't see it, you can't get them, it's a major cleaning operation to maintain them, but at the end, you can have your selection of valves, but they have to be at the end.
Yeah, in the interest of moving it forward, the reason why the valves weren't put back on, which was their recommendation, was the committee and then the town wanted to just see how things went with no valves, if it changed that much before the money was spent. And also they wanted to take the time to maybe explore any other options there might be out there, whether it would be putting a box on the end to completely stop water from coming back into the pipes, or other things before spending more money on the external valves.
And that's certainly justified.
Right.
So that's why there's no valves there right now.
The
So,
problems that the valves that were taken out never would have lasted long term.
so anyway, I just so we can move it.
No, and I totally understand that, and it was worthwhile to look at that. And again, this is a great documentary to kind of take you from day one to where we are today. So if you ever want to go back and peruse it, right down to the riprap configuration, and these are the steps that would be taken to install those valves. But getting right to the point, we found that the bay does not overtake the dune. It stays behind the dune. We actually looked at, and again, we feel there were three, because we questioned, the first thing we questioned was, why are there 3 36-inch outfalls? That's a lot of pipe for one street. When you look around town, there's one. And we feel, A, redundancy, and number two, because of the lack of fall, it's practically flat. You're looking for at least 4 foot of elevation difference or more to get that head going, to make bladder valves work, as they call it, or duckbills. You don't have that. That's why you have dual 15s and 18s, to get that 36-inch capacity parallel running down Reed. And then I think it was meant to be redundant, like push it, like have it mitigate out at some point. Well, the types of valves and their installation, and I think, Bill, you and I and Jim, we've talked over the years about, we've had other folks come in and say, why would you put them in a box where you can't see them, where you can't monitor them, and it's hard to get to maintain them? So we said, right, we think the idea is right, but poor design. I'm gonna say it. So put them on the outside where you can see it, you can monitor it, and you can maintain it and vac it out. That was one thing Bill and I even talked about. You might want to consider teaming up with, I think you're talking about maybe with the county or Rehoboth, like a vac truck, 2-3 times a year. You gotta go down there. That's why the riprap was set where get the stone away from the bottoms of those pipes, because if they're already at the bottoms, it's gonna silt up over. Give yourself some freeboard and a chance to see it and then clean it out, prevent that.
So, yeah, let's go with the recommendations.
Okay. This would be the steps or the tasks needed to install those flapper valves. Clean the storm sewer segments connecting to the outfall, clean the outfall area, remove any excess sediment built up from the past year. Move riprap out of the way for the flapper gate valve. Some of this actually was done under the riprap configuration, flapper valve installation, which would involve a couple procedures. One is you would take, right now you have 36-inch HDPE corrugated plastic pipe. They're about 10 foot long out of the new junction box that's sistered onto the existing junction box. And they fan out like fingers. In fact, if you don't mind, bounce back to the original design. Right, one more. Okay. This is the original design that we inherited. If you notice, this is the old junction box here, folks. These are your dual, I think they're 15s coming into the old junction box. They put in a new junction box here, and they have these three 36-inch flares coming out. You're already at a negative 1.75 feet. You're already at below water level at the ends of these three flared ends.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? So the inline valves that we showed you pictures of were back here in the box. Can't see it. So what's happening is you get a nor'easter coming in here, you've got about 10 to 12 feet of pipe that's taking sand, pushing against those valves potentially before you even notice they're not working. So our recommendation was remove these, get something that will be fused to the end of the plastic that you can monitor. This was then dug out to give you that freeboard as I was describing. And then what we did was this riprap was, you have the existing pier right here. This existing riprap was then wrapped up to here, went beyond this first breakwater. We had another one coming here just below the canoe launch, because we wanted to maintain that and keep it clean. And then another one here with the thinking of, let's create this baffle system, try to detain some of the silt and sand. And then if it finally did get to the inverts of those three pipes, that had a place to collect, you can see it and clean it.
And you could theoretically spray it with a hose and water high pressure or stuff like that to wash the stuff away from it.
Right,
Makes
but
sense.
whether you put a pump in there or not, you still gotta close the bay from coming in.
Right.
To give the pump a chance to pump out over the dune, which it never penetrated across the dune. We monitored that, Bill, right? That stays dry even during the high tide. What happens is, because there's no valves, whether inside or outside to keep the bay out, it'll come up through those dual 18s and come up through the catch basins and flood reef.
We talked about the three outfalls, and there were some discussions. Why do we need all three? The redundancy, or do we just need one that works?
136, that was for the
Yeah,
whole
instead of
price.
installing three, why wouldn't we just do one?
Well,
I think they're trying to accomplish two things. I think they wanted redundancy and they were looking at volume.
Okay.
Even though the pipes are ultimately, they were gonna fail. I think they had I think they wanted a larger pipe diameter, but they divided into three pipes because of the elevation issue.
So we've got three
Most
pipes,
foolish.
two really don't work great, one is working semi. So the question would be is, are you saying putting three in? Three inline valves at the very end, or one in, what's the recommendation?
we actually, why don't you jump to the very last one, so, I'll go 1 before that. Right there. So, we actually, our quote, because you have three existing plastic corrugated pipes now, our original quote was to perform the work that was described on that prior slide with all those tasks, right down to fusing onto the three that you have. But we also, and that's your $60,000 number. It would be less investigating, closing off, and just shutting off 2 of those, because what you would do is you would take off, you have 3 plastic pipes and 3 plastic flared ends that have stainless steel retaining rings to hold them on. You'd remove all 3 of those. You could investigate plugging 2 of them, capping them, if you will, and putting a flapper valve on just 1. Because to your point, sir, 1 was only probably working anyway. And like Chris was alluding to, I think it was redundancy and just like, hey, 3's better than 1.
Just in case. Right.
Exactly, 3's better than 1 because it's gonna take time to percolate that water out because it's literally flat.
Joe, do you want to offer something?
I think the other thing you have to look at as well, having 3, it does provide redundancy. In case something happens to one, and it could happen.
Well, it actually did.
Yeah, but the other thing is, I think Mr. Palmer's right, that 36-inch pipe is probably the handle capacity one. But it's gonna cost almost as much money to cap off the others. And you're just gonna have a liability in these capped off pipes.
So it's a good safety route.
Yeah.
So our number did look at putting 3 valves on, rearranging some of the gabion and stone. But would a pump station be the ultimate goal? For this situation, probably. And I know Chris, I'm gonna hand it off to him, let him speak more to that. But we know you need a fix now. The bay's not going away, and if anything, it's gonna get worse. But here's what we do know. We know it doesn't penetrate the dune. It stays behind the dune. We also know it's relatively flat. I have it in the packet, we didn't get to it. I have a contour map that shows the elevation from Coastal Highway to Reed. It's about 2.1 feet of elevation difference. So you don't have the freeboard, you don't have that fall to push a duckbill open and keep it open. You need valves. You just don't need them inside a box where you can't see them and monitor them. You need them on the outside. That was always reconfigure the riprap, put the valves on the outside, maintain it. This is not a set it, forget it type of thing. You gotta change the oil every 3,000 miles and monitor it. So we think the redundancy, 1 did work, but two out of the 3 clogged and failed. And the first year it was done. So with that, I'm gonna hand it off to Chris because we think a pump station is probably a mini bayer possibly might be what Reed's gonna need. Somebody thought of that ahead of us because they put 3 of these things where everywhere else in town only has 1. So with that.
Can I ask you one quick question? You said it's gonna be almost just as much to plug 2 pipes and put a flat on the other?
It's expensive to go out and buy a plug and to seal it off and to install it and go through all the activity which is involved. It's almost as much money as putting in the 3. I think we have a proposal into you guys from before, which I believe you've been informed that we can still honor it. And I think the price is around.
And Drew, I'm going to interrupt you. If I remember correctly, and I may be absolutely wrong, I'm old and forgetful. If I remember correctly, when that whole system was put in, the 3 pipes were put in, they felt because the amount of area that drained to that one street, they were worried about the amount of water that would have to drain out of those pipes.
My guess is there's a certain volume of water they were trying to get out. And they said, okay, we need a pipe that can handle this many cubic feet per second of water. They knew they couldn't put the size pipe in that they need. Let's say it's 24 inches just for conversation because of how high the tide was and whatnot. So I said, okay, well, so we'll put 3 pipes in, smaller diameter, A plus B plus C was the capacity of 1. But what they failed to realize is there's a clogging issue and the fact that the pipes are still so shallow that they're going to have
But I
an
mean,
issue.
we're talking about why the 3 pipes. That's probably why, because they felt the amount of water that drains from not all over town, but through a wide area of town. What is it, 34 acres that?
I think what we're getting at here too is that, it was mentioned earlier in the meeting, it's not just the drainage, you're not just looking at that watershed of what comes in on Reed Street. You're looking at the other streets that seem to have a propensity to drain into Reed Street.
When you
And they're
design,
all going in that direction, because that's the low point, and everything's draining there, so maybe you could calculate what Reed Street will get, but you have to add in the other ones. And that could be the reason why someone thought it was a good idea to have 3 pipes versus.
When you're designing, there's two parts. The first part is how much capacity do I need in my pipe? The second part of it is the water, the tidal element, so that when the pipes discharge, you know what volume is available to accept the water once it exits the pipe. I think the first part was done. I don't think the second part was done. Because if the second part was done, someone should have given you a heads up about how it's going to function in real life.
His final summary was really good of covering all those points. And Rob Whitford of Precision Marine, I think, said a thing years ago when he tried some things, raise the land to lower the water. The fact of the matter is, when the tide goes down, it drains quickly. It drains in half an hour, But if the tide's up, it's got nowhere to go. So,
But you gotta keep the bay out.
well, you gotta keep the bay out, but even so, the water's not gonna flow out if the bay is up.
So, if I can, 5 more minutes, 'cause I know you want to deliberate.
Yeah.
So I've personally had the pleasure of working with Dewey Beach for the last 12 years in varying capacities. From day one, that's been an issue.
Mm-hmm.
I know how sensitive this is. It gets you angry because it hasn't gotten fixed yet. So I understand how everybody feels. I understand why there's so much passion and I respect nothing less. I authored the letter that hopefully you got a chance to read before the meeting today. We didn't want to give you several semi-expensive short-term fixes that won't fix the problem. I believe that this will make it better. Now, what's the definition of better in Dewey Beach if you live on Reed? Does it mean I don't want the flood to SR1? Does it mean there's going to be a puddle there 24/7? I don't think any solution that is deemed short-term is ever going to be good enough. This is going to make it better. It's going to make it a lot better. It's not going to fix it. A pump station is going to fix it. By reputation, Remington and Veronic Engineers is 500 people. We cover 7 different states, and we represent the majority of the coastal communities in New Jersey. They have major flooding issues that we've dealt with on 24/7. We've designed pump stations to handle flooding in Atlantic City and Wildwood. Wildwood, right in the heart of the town, constant flooding would drench their boardwalk, put it underwater, and would flood several other residences. We designed a pump station. It doesn't happen anymore. You need a mechanical fix, which engineers hate to do mechanical fixes for stormwater issues. But in this case, it's justified. That's your solution, is to do a pump station, pump the water, and you're never having an issue again.
Long term.
Long term. In the short term, the $60,000, if it makes it better, and I hope that my definition of better is the same as yours, it's probably a good idea in the short term.
Did you guys talk about this 7 or 8, 9 years ago, about putting a pump there and pumping water down Hayden to McKinley Marsh?
That was never discussed.
Remember when Jim
Well, I
Laird
was
was a
here.
commissioner? When Jim Laird was a commissioner?
Jim Laird was
This-
commissioner, and I believe there was Cotton Engineering that was talking about.
Is that it? Okay.
Yeah, it
But
was.
that was talked about back
They did
then.
discuss that, they actually talked, Cotton wanted to put up a wall, a 6-foot seawall also, all the way across down the bay.
You have never had engineering continuity. What does that mean? You had a bunch of people come in, they give different suggestions, you've listened to those people, hasn't quite worked yet. You've had us here for the last couple of years. We've made progress.
Well, I
So-
agree.
What I want to interject is, the town spent a lot of money on Bear Avenue, and we took out a multi-year loan to pay off the $1 million that we bought. I don't think anybody had any, I guess, I'll look at the right word. Nobody had the stomach to spend another $1 million or whatever, for another pump
Took
station.
us forever to pay it off.
Yeah, so we're at a different stage now, and I think what everybody's saying is, you can do this for a short-term fix, I think both of you are saying there's a short-term fix. And the long-term fix, I think, is what I'm hearing, is a pump, some sort of a pump system.
As over the bar, right?
Right.
And then when we're looking at these proposals, that was the whole reason we slowed down on putting valves on the end, is we don't want to spend any more. We don't keep spending more money. We're probably up to $360,000 at least on the end of Reed, and we're back to square one.
Listen,
So
I
that's,
remember when Jim and Bill called me, because I was placing the order, and they're like, well, Kev, and they called me like 20 minutes later, they just put a hold on that, like, we're throwing money into my money pit. And I totally get it, and I understand that.
He doesn't live on Reed, he's excited.
So so back to you discussing a pumping station or pump plan.
Right.
So what we do here, will we end up just being scrapped if we end up putting a pump in? So that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid spending $60,000 and then we hopefully maybe get some money from the state. We put the pump in and then that $60,000 is wasted. We're just trying to avoid those kind of things. I understand it's a quick fix. And
It's gonna make it better. It's gonna make it better.
and that was the other thing, if the town can maintain it, and that was the biggest part of it, if the town is able to maintain these valves, because, and then that's the other thing I asked you about with 3. Well, that's 3 valves we gotta maintain. It may be just the same amount of price to put the valves in, but we gotta maintain all 3 of them.
Mr. Chairman, they're not gonna rush shut. These won't rush shut.
Right.
Well, no, I'm talking about the debris, the sand that has to be kept out of it. So that you recommended at least twice a year, maybe every quarter. So now we do 1, or we have to do 3 of them to keep
Can I go
3
back
of
on
them.
that? Can I answer that?
Yeah.
I think the kind of maintenance we're talking about, if you have the inline valves, you're looking at three lines, and you have to go in, you have to clean it, that's 3 valves. We're looking at external valves, and so really, to go in there and clean out that area in front, and they're all right next to each other.
Yeah,
It's no different than whether you had 1 or 3.
okay.
It's pretty much the same thing. The
Ah.
whole concept is, let's keep the silt down as low as possible, so it doesn't get in those valves, and it doesn't jam them up so that they're blocked open and then silt starts going.
That makes sense.
Your big major storm, you're gonna notice a difference. Your average storm, probably not.
Yep.
Well, something Kevin put in front of you, those are 2 examples of 2 pump stations we designed. The first was from Atlantic City, the second was from Wildwood, the Wildwood one won an award. Just want to give you some resident information that you can read when you go home tonight, I'm sure.
And we all know it's gonna flood on a nor'easter and a hurricane. That's a given. It's gonna flood. We're trying to avoid the high tides. All fall, we've had just your regular high tides, and maybe even a little bit bigger high tides, and it's been bad. So hopefully we can discuss whether 1 valve or 3 valves or what program will.
Well, and the approach that John from Beacon took, it's not a wrong approach, it's based on philosophy. He was take care of the average storm. We want this to last 20, 30 years. I want to take care of the nor'easter and the average storm. That's why the system we're proposing is a little more robust. It's going to have 2 pumps, so when 1 pump doesn't work, you have a backup pump in place. It may have an emergency electrical generator. So when you lose power, you're still going to not flood. It's going to do it 24/7. That was a question you would ask.
And I have another question about the other pumping station. The idea that there would be a pumping station that would pump water from the street up into the marsh does not make any sense to me.
And it was turned down before.
And let me finish, because if everything in Dewey Beach goes to Reed, why would you pump it to the marsh so then it can roll down Hayden Road? That makes no sense. Why would you pump something up so it can come back down?
I don't think in my conversations with either Beacon or RV, we haven't discussed that, and that has not been an option.
Well, that
That's
came
old-
up here again, so I just wanted to come out. Well, it's old stuff, but old stuff keeps coming back.
Keep recycling.
It keeps recycling and it continues to not make any sense to me. So I would like us to maybe stop revisiting things that don't make sense.
I think neither one of the engineers we heard today brought that up as an option though, right? And- Right.
I know. But let me also say one last thing. I heard a lot of, well, I did some quick calculation. I did quick this, I did quick that. There's no quick calculations. There's written calculations, real calculations that are going to show this is going to work. There's no guessing here. There's no, I want to put 3 pipes in, not do a hydraulic and engineering study. Should have been an engineering study that got done, because no one did one. There's no way if I would have put those 3 things in if they'd actually studied it. It was studied, you design it the right way, do it right the first time. It lasts 30 years, minimum.
Well, that would work for all of us.
That's how we operate.
But I do think you have to set the expectations on a pump as well. I mean, when we had the really large Bayard pump failed, just because the water comes over top, which would happen on this. Once the water is completely over the berm and you've got 3-4 feet of water in the street, it's done.
But if I have a nice deep waterproof wet well, that's going to take that initial line, take that initial hit, I'm not gonna have that problem.
But where's the water gonna go?
It's
Yeah,
gonna go into that, it's gonna go into that tank, and the pumps are gonna start operating.
but
It's gonna recirculate the water to give it time to mitigate. I'm sorry.
no, I'm
Yes,
sorry,
yes,
I
yes,
interrupted you. But the tank is gonna be underwater too, isn't
It's
it?
gonna be waterproof, it's gonna be buoyant.
But buoyant.
It's not gonna float down the bay.
No, I don't think it was going to do that, but it's gonna be underwater too, isn't it?
It will.
Well, let me make a quick comment. Baird Avenue is a good example of probably 95% of the time it works great.
Exactly.
There have been some times clearly where the bay overtook the pump system, and so it was pumping back and forth. So we had to shut it down, correct?
Yeah,
So it
it
didn't
shuts
work, but we had to wait for the bay receded, and then it would work, and it did drain out. This is probably gonna be the same situation.
Exactly, just want to
It's
set
not gonna stop
expectations.
it from, yeah.
But a
It
modern,
might just-
I'm sorry.
I guess my point is, eventually it will work. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, we've seen it work in one area.
But both companies have advised basically the same thing.
They're
Both
both
companies have
out-
advised valves at the
Inline
end,
valves.
at the end of the pipe.
Yes.
Dale,
And the question really comes down to is, we've got a long-term fix and you've got a potential short-term disruption. That's all it
they
is.
already have pricing for it, not a proposal.
That's really what you've got.
If you read my letter, everything I said today was exactly in my letter. I didn't make any changes. I don't know if I can say the same for the other gentleman. So I'm gonna leave you with it.
So that's, and Bill and I have chatted so many times, we're not engineers, we can't talk about what the right
That's
way to
getting
do
close.
it is, we're not, and we're relying on other people to give us good estimates that you all ask for. And, you all take decisions,
But-
not all of your engineers.
And, how do we make decisions about maintenance? Because the town does not own any of this maintenance equipment. And, right now, we use what, Rehoboth comes
we've
in?
had Rehoboth in the county, both come out to assist us.
Could it be,
in some of the
something to
schools.
schedule? We have that equipment down here. I'm not saying that we would be the ones to do it,
What do you want to
but we
do?
have that equipment down here in Millsboro. We have a whole fleet, and we do all kinds of areas along here, and it can be scheduled as one of those activities.
See, I think we wait until things are bad and then, they come in. I think we need a routine maintenance that, because the sand is always, it's gonna happen. The sand is constantly coming in there and clogging the drains. And like he said, you can look in the grates and you can see the water level.
Chris, was there any numbers on the pump system?
We gave you an engineering number, which is soup to nuts, permitting, everything you need to do. It was so hard to give you a number because I based on 750,000 gallons per day. That's my guesstimate based on the watershed and the intensity of your worst storm. The gentleman previous said 150. I think that's like an average storm. Sure. I think you're closer to 750, and that's a robust pump station. If you had an interest with going to Remington and Vernon to move this ahead, we would perform some free engineering, we'll say, and put together what we really think it is and give you a very, very exact number. We gave you a number, it's over $300,000. It could be less. If we could just have a couple weeks to study it a little bit further.
So is the number, if I could ask a question, the number you provided here, the 368,800, is that just for the engineering of the project, or is that
That's
an estimate from the time you start permitting all the way through to completion?
No, that's engineering.
That's engineering only, yeah.
That's right.
Because I looked at the ones in New Jersey, one was $12 million and the other one was 6.2 million.
Nothing like
No.
Yeah, I understand that,
So
but
not gonna be anything like that. Those are on the Atlantic Ocean, not on the bay. So different concept.
They pump out the whole ocean, not just.
Different water density.
Phil has worked very diligently to try to get a grant for us, and, we can't really do any of this work, because once we start planning for all of this, you're losing the ability to get the grant. Studying and all that, so it's kind of, because once we start doing it, they'll say, well, you've already done it, so just finish it
Right.
off, so that's.
I
one of the
actually
problems
helped
we
Jim
have.
and Bill with some of the language for that grant opportunity, and
Yeah.
keeping my fingers crossed. But to Jim's point, you almost have to put a Band-Aid on it to hold it until the money comes through, and then you can go crazy with it.
Which again is why we have the two-pronged approach, because getting that grant money could take years. And you don't know. and it's not clear that
So you're
people are-
saying, wait a minute, so we're saying that we're gonna possibly put valves in and grant money later for a pump station.
So I've requested $1 million from Senator Coon's office. If you looked at my newsletter that I put out last month, it is sitting right now in the 2024 government budget, which is right now,
Yeah.
it's on hold. So it could be, it could get approved in the next 6 months. And if it was approved with our $1 million in it, then it would be approximately 6 to 8 months before we could actually start seeing any of the progress to start using the money to have the engineering study done. In the meantime, though, we have to do something.
What I'm saying, that's just for the pump, right? Pump station.
That was for a pump station.
Yeah, now we're talking about, we need to put inline, put valves on the pipe.
Exterior valve.
Exterior.
Exterior valves on the outside.
No more interior valves.
Right.
Exterior.
And it's both engineering firms that are saying that, not just one saying
Yeah,
interior.
That's what
right?
I said earlier, both said the same thing.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like
And-
one more caveat with the pump station.
And that's what, 60?
Transparent. The longest timeline is not us, it's gonna be the state with the permit. Because you're gonna go Army Corps of Engineers, you're gonna go DENREC. That's the longest timeline of those permits, it's not gonna be Remington and Vernon.
We have to get permits from them too for all that,
Absolutely.
for yours?
Yes.
But-
No, not for us, for the construction of the station.
Yeah, for the flaps, we won't need that because it'll be considered continuing maintenance
Correct.
at the end. And we will just continue under the permits that are already there. But when we go to do a pump station, a big pump station like this,
And the flaps are 20 apiece.
the total they have right now is it says approximately $60,000 from Remington and Vernon.
That was the one of the slides that had a breakdown of the different tasks involved, but yeah, roughly, including installations, about 20 apiece.
But it's taking what's in there now away and then replacing it with something on the end. Is that
Nothing
correct?
in there.
There's nothing in there
Oh,
now.
because we took it out. That's
already
right,
gone.
that's right.
So it's clean up, a little bit of excavation and taking the flares off, putting that.
And putting the, on the end.
Can I ask a question on that? That's a corrugated pipe.
It is.
So wouldn't that trap sand in the corrugated pipe
That's a good.
versus having it
Is it-
lined properly?
So the external can be ribbed, but sometimes the inside is smooth.
Yeah.
I don't know if the inside is smooth.
I think, when I looked at it, the inside was smooth.
Okay.
And the corrugations are on the outside of the pipe.
In the pictures, it looks smooth.
I have a picture of it.
So basically, it's
On the
a
picture we showed it.
Yeah.
it's a round plastic pipe wrapped with a corrugation for strength. So your viscosity is moves, the water will move.
We can have you line it for you, but.
So it comes down to both companies have recommended the same thing, and now you're talking about, we have to talk about it.
But Kevin, one last thing, on one of your presentations, you recommended a different type of valve on the end. It was a mechanical, it was a very simple valve that just shut. And then there was another one that was more of
It's like a duck.
yeah.
No, it wasn't a duck bill. It was actually something that worked on a timer with the tides. That was the first suggestion and write-up that you gave us.
It was a very simple, almost a manually operated.
Correct. Yes.
You told me it was based on the title,
Yeah.
right? And it would open with the tide and close with.
Is that the valve we're talking about?
The one I presented or showing you tonight is.
That's our latest recommendation.
More robust than that.
Okay.
More robust than that. That was a very simple, it was more for like, hey, give me like your economy model all the way up to the Cadillac. That's an economy model. It's very simple, flatboard type. You'd have to keep your eye on it, type of thing. It's very simple. The other one, the duck bill, is I call them bladder valves. It's more like you need a lot of head pressure to pop them open, and then if any pressure comes back, it'll shut. But I know Dale, in fact, I started presenting and you cut me off. You're just like, we have experience with that.
Oh my God, yes.
Stop. I'm like, okay. So I didn't go any further. But that other one was very simple, it was a very simplistic,
If we keep it clean, it should work fine. We keep it clean, it should work fine. I think we can
it's a
do
very
that.
simple version of the one that you saw in the slides today.
Yeah.
It's high tide, we'll have to go dig out the, sand. That's really what it comes down to. When it goes to low tide, we'll be able to go in there and do that, have that.
So what's going to be on the end of the pipe then? What are you proposing?
It's
Basically,
a valve that goes like this.
it's a flat valve, it's in.
Okay, all right.
There's a picture of it there's a picture of it actually in your PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just discussed 2 levels.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
So it's kind of like a hatch right there that opens and closes.
And will sand keep it from closing?
I was gonna, what do you mean by keeping it from?
I mean,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Any debris
Will
will,
sand prevent it from closing after the storm's over? It could, sure.
Yeah.
Just like a basketball could, or
So-
trash can.
right, a trash can is floating in there, bottles, but.
That to me
you
is
see it not
one of the biggest issues.
And address the issue versus the way what you had
And we
before.
How much maintenance would be required to
No.
get the thing to close? I mean, how hard is that going to be for, we don't have big maintenance crews here.
If you had a buildup of sand, but
No,
like I
the
said, we had a
that's
kind of a
They
reservoir.
haven't really been
area
given the
that
facts.
Dug out below the
So
ends of those
let's not
pipes.
just rehash
That would
everything.
fill up with sand,
Do
so
what we're
got
gonna do.
past the mouth of that
Yeah.
and prevented it from, you would
I
see
agree.
that, you have to back that out.
Yeah,
It's just a vacuum truck.
Right.
just the vacuum truck that
Suck
we
the sand
do.
out of the way.
Okay, all right.
So, but again, if the riprap design was to freeboard, okay, it is a freeboard. Itinerary.
No,
Yeah.
I asked.
We need all the information we can get.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Answered my
All we're doing is trying to save the money to the town, that's all.
Understood.
That's all we're trying to do.
Thank you for letting us know that today, we appreciate it.
Thanks. Great presentation.
Thanks.
Would you like us to leave, or do you want us to stay if you have other questions?
Are we gonna actually look at the phase 2 of the realigning of the 2 areas that I would recommend with Remington Verdict? Or do you want them to step out of the room while we discuss them?
Why don't we talk about phase 2?
Yeah.
And then they step out that
Right.
way. That would be the best thing to do.
All right, very good. So,
5 minutes or less, Kevin.
I know you got the hook, right?
That's up.
All right, so I brought boards, which I'm gonna leave with the town. What I did was I gave you an overview of all of Dewey, as well as phase 1 that we had done prior. And then this is the
Thank you.
phase 2 map. That Bill, you asked me to make. bring copies
Yeah,
of.
thank you.
And you like this? Yep. I will leave the extra copy there. That's actually the phase 2 map. So what you're looking at, folks, is below this line, phase 1 that we had done prior.
Oh, okay.
This is phase 1.
This is phase 2, everything down here. So this is the south end of town. And this is Rodney right here, which I know you guys are all familiar with. So we have a color coding system. So basically, a lot less infrastructure in phase 2. The pipes were in better shape than they were in phase 1. Bill, and I think that wasn't a surprise, but it can kind of confirm what we thought.
Anything had to be better,
Yes, sir.
anything.
Yes, sir. The south end of town was much better. But in any event, we determined from our televising and the reports that candidates for relining, and we did give a cost proposal to do that, our recommendation was outfall 2, which is at the end of Dickinson, from the first catch basin structure, which we're calling inlet 2. It's about 78 feet of pipe, and that is 18-inch to that outfall. We recommend relining there. You have dual pipes here at the end of Van Dyke. So from catch basin 3, I'm sorry, sir. Now, Bill and Jim, we went over this. This is near the hotel.
Yeah, so
This is a funky system.
So Van Dyke Street, if I could say, Mr. Chair, I am not recommending that we reline those pipes. For the simple reason is Dewey Beach Enterprises,
Right.
RV Hanna should be responsible for the maintenance of those outfalls. And the last meeting I had with them in Denrec, was that they were gonna go to the Corps of Engineers and redesign the outfalls there. So my recommendation at this time, as we move through this, is that we do not do anything on Van Dyke Street at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and they got some funky pipes moving around over there. The last area of concern was on Collins. Going back to Coastal Highway, relining that 24-inch RCP from all the way through Catch Basin 4 and then to the outfall 5 at the end. That's all 24-inch RCP. That definitely should be relined. However, what was in good shape, but we gave a segmented cost estimate for this bill, was from Catch Basin 5 to 4, which kind of goes from south to north across the street. That is a, what size pipe? I apologize, I do not have that noted, but the thinking was, while they were there, we could just take care of it. It was probably another $8,700. It did not, that was in better shape than the 24-inch RCP, but we did provide that as a segmented estimate, should the town want to take advantage of that.
What size is that?
I do not have that noted. I thought I did, I apologize. Brown, I'm gonna say it's 15. Looks like it's a 15.
15?
Yeah, so it's a 15 running into the 24. That's from Catch Basin 5 to 4.
So it looks
That's
like.
on which street?
It's on Collins.
So, Mr. Chair, my recommendation was, after talking with Jim and with Kevin, was that we consider the 70 feet that he discussed down there at the end of Dickinson Street, which basically runs from the turnaround there between the lighthouse and the Rusty Rudder, and it runs out underneath almost part of the public pier that is in that area. That needs to be completely cleaned out and relined, and probably some riprap put on the end of that. And then also down on Collins Street, and as you see down on Collins Street, there's a pretty big expense on Collins Street. Why? They're saying they have to dry, what I would call like dry water around where the pipe comes out at the end of Collins Street. It's almost always wet, it's kind of like on Reed Street. So what they're saying is they have to put a barrier in, pump the water out, dry it before they reline it, because they superheat the fiberglass or plastic, whatever you use, and you have to dry that all out. So that's why you have a cost of $87,000 to bulkhead in and around the outlets at the end. So when you look at the prices, that's why that Collins Street is so expensive, because they got to dry that whole end that goes out into the bay before they can actually reline it.
Basically, almost like a call for dam or sandbags to like create a well, pump it dry, dewater it, so they can do their work. It can't be wet when they put in that resin, that fiberglass
The
resin.
pipe can be wet, but when it comes out, then the other end, you come on.
So that coffer dam is $87,000 or just the total project?
That was just the one end.
That's
The
just,
dewatering.
yeah, the dewatering, that's just the one end.
You should have the cost. It's in one of your handouts. It breaks down the cost for Dickinson Street of being $14,800. Collins Street is $29,600, and then to do the bulkheading dry it, that's $87,900. And then that small section that Kevin talked about on Collins Street is $8,750, for a total of Dickinson Street and Collins for all the work of the $141,500, or $141,50. We have approximately $800,000 in our infrastructure budget right now, approximately.
Yeah, we tried to give you an itemized street by street breakdown for consideration, but all in all, where the north end of town needed immediate action, this did not. Not right away. It's not like critical, but these beige highlighted areas, folks, that you see on your map, those are the ones that I would say the next year or two should be considered. But Bill wanted to see if we could move on.
What was the total?
The total price for Dickinson Street and Collins Street is $141,050.
And Jim and Bill, I'm gonna leave you these boards, okay? You have one of the whole town, one of the north end, one of the south.
Sure.
141.5.
Yes.
So what do we have in?
No, 141.50, not 5,
Oh,
and 50.
what's the amount we have set aside?
We have
right now?
approximately $800,000 in the infrastructure budget right now, approximately. That moves with the set-asides that go into it, okay?
Of course.
Yeah.
It goes up and down, what we spend and what we take in.
Right.
I gotta tell you, I think we ought to just do it. 141.50.
For the relining.
Yeah,
And can I ask a question? So, Kevin, now, I had those questions about what was in the contract from this other, and I don't know if it's SPS, but the Institute Forum. Remember they talked about like the environmental fence, things like that? The permits were all gonna cost us extra above the 141. You said that was not the case, correct?
That's all included.
So the 141.50 is turnkey.
That's all inclusive.
Minor if we run into something major inside one of the parks.
That we don't, like we discovered another catch basin like
Yeah.
the north end and popped out of nowhere.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah, we could, I think we should vote on that one.
And you can call us SPS.
I personally think that we have more than enough money, we don't have to worry about burning up all the funds. It needs to be done, and the sooner the better for the town. You know, I make a motion that we approve $141,050 for Dickinson and Collins.
I'll second that.
You can't second that.
That's
You
true, I
can't,
can't.
I'll second
I'll
it.
second, okay.
Okay.
You're used to seconding, but you can't second that.
Well, I'm not gonna drag it on because I can run my mouth. so-
All in favor?
Yeah.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. It's
So
something.
that will be a recommendation to the application.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Now, is there something else in this project we want to talk about?
Not that I'm aware of for the realigning. I think what you just voted on will take care of Collins at Dickinson Street. It's a matter of me just coordinating with Kevin and Chris on some particulars
Gotta
about
say,
the work.
And if you guys would let us
Who's gonna
have
be
some
there?
discussions on the flood mitigation on Reed, that'd be great. I really appreciate it.
guys say we don't want any problems.
Thank you very much.
We don't want to hear from that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having
Good presentation, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Good luck, guys.
Thank you.
One other thing, I just want to recommend that, at least advise everybody, Chris Planner, RVE, is our town planner. Still is, hasn't changed, so he is our town planner.
Well, thank you.
sir.
I haven't had any problems lately, so home zoning's good, far's good, I haven't had a problem in a while, so.
Right, weekend.
So when would that start?
As soon as I sign the contract and they get their crew together, and of course, as always, we want the work done by April 15th, right?
April 15th, and you'll let
I was teasing Katie about that earlier, so we gotta be out of here by tax day.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you. Bye, Katie.
Bill, I'm sorry, but I didn't understand what they said when they would start.
So as soon as we sign the contract and they can get the crew and schedule them, my deadline is, I want them done by April 15th and out of there.
I know when you want them done, but sooner they start.
Yeah,
As I recall, Bill, isn't it usually around January when it's low tide? That's usually when we try to do it.
yeah, that thing on Collins Street that they have to do, where they're gonna have to put something in the water and dry well that's gonna take, they gotta do that with the tides. And there's gotta be coordination with the company that's at the end of that, right? Because they've got a bulkhead in there. I mean, it's not gonna be an easy task for them to do. It's gonna take, Dickinson Street should be rather easy, but Collins is gonna take a little time.
Is Collins where the marina is?
Yes.
Okay.
Gotcha. Well, I don't want to, I know we've been here for a while, hold you guys up. So if we could just have a quick discussion on the two proposals that they gave us. The first, we didn't really get any kind of numbers.
It's in
on
his
the-
proposal.
Yeah.
From Beacon, we have.
Yeah,
we
it's
have
in there,
some
it's on
numbers?
page 3. For the first step, which we put the flaps on the outside, he would put one flap on the
One
outside
flap.
and plug 2, right? Because he feels that would put more pressure down one pipe. That's his opinion. To do that with closing the 2 and adding the one flap at the end, he has here an estimated cost of $44,300. If you want a better type of seal at the end, what he calls a bubble tight seal desired, the type of flap that would be put on was $52,000. Then in step 2, he talks about mitigation by forcing the runoff through the number 1 culvert, right? 'Cause he, clog 2, he would install a wall on the outside of the 1 pipe that would keep water from really forcing itself in across at the mouth of the riprap. And you can see that in there as step 2. Then his step 3 is to actually put the pump into the hole that's already there. And it's going to be a pump that's nothing like Bayard Avenue. It's going to be a small pump that's there just to help get the water out when there's a high tide. And that would be running the pipe over into the bay, right? Which we may have to get DENREC's approval for it, and we'd have to run electricity for it. So for all 3 of his phases, his estimate for all 3, if we do all of them with the pump, his estimate was $128,000. If you read that, just read what he says, because I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Do you have it?
I did not have his proposal.
You didn't have the Beacon proposal?
I apologize. I don't have it.
Did you have the Beacon?
I have it.
You have it, right?
Yeah. I wasn't reading it that he's adding the 3 steps though, to come up with that amount.
Yes.
Okay,
That's Beacons.
yeah.
That's Beacons. And then for
I
RV,
have RVs.
yeah, for RV,
Yeah.
theirs is to put 3 flaps at the end of each one of the pipes for $60,000.
Right.
This is on our website.
It is. It's,
Well, now,
Right.
part of
It
the
is.
meeting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I've got it at home, right?
He basically alluded to.
The
They're-
Beacon's
they're
proposal at
basically-
128,000, that wasn't 3 flaps, that was sealing 2, flapping 1, and putting the pump in.
putting in additional barriers out where the riprap is and adding a small pump. His estimate's of $128,000.
Additional stuff out with a riprap.
That's what it says here. So you got to read his proposal that you have in front of you there, that you have, Mr. Chair, and that you have. Read what his 3 steps are. I want to make sure we're all on the same page.
I found it interesting that about 1 pipe and also that one was working properly.
Yeah.
I'm worried about spending a lot of money on 2 pipes that we don't have to. If 1 pipe can function properly and we can put a valve on 1 pipe, it seems like a lot of money to plug
With
2
the
pipes.
60,000?
Yeah, that
Well,
seems like a lot of
60,000
money.
is
So-
opposed to
so-
120.
So from RV, they will put 3 flaps on all 3 of them.
Yeah.
From Beacon will close 2 off and put 1 flap on for, I think it's, and I don't have my proposal, it's $44,000.
I
Right.
use $20,000 less.
Right.
than-
But he'll close 2 of them off and put 1 flap on. And Beacon feels that'll drive more water through that pipe on the southern end, which I believe Phil said was the one that worked the best. And then RV says leave all 3 of them there, put flaps on all 3 of them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the basic for each one.
I like the 1 pipe. I just think it's less maintenance, and I believe the back pressure would help if you're forcing it through 1 pipe to keep that valve free.
That's why it is free. And it's why the other 2 clogged up, because there wasn't enough pressure for head of the thing to force it out.
What if we propose that to Remington Verdict?
So when the gentleman from SPS who actually does the work for Remington Verdict, his thing was you can clog the 2 pipes up, but it's going to cost him almost as much, he said, to clog those 2 and put a flap on it if you leave all 3 of them and put 3 flaps on. I believe that's what he said.
I heard
Okay.
that too,
You're
yeah.
right.
So you can make a recommendation to the commissioners that they hear both of these or they hear, whatever you want to recommend to them. It's up to you. Just understand, and I know it's frustrating, that whatever you decide, it's going to have to go to the commissioners. So if you decide to make a recommendation today, it wouldn't go until December's meeting. And then December's meeting, if they vote and approve it, then we would go to Beacon or Remington at that time and say, let's do the contract, let's get these things in as soon as possible, right? And I think it's December 20th, Kate, is our meeting, December 20th? Is that the third?
For town council?
Yes.
I gotta tell you, I was more,
Oh, the 15th, I'm sorry. Thank you.
I was
Kate.
more assured by Remington and Verdict. And I like their proposal, and I think we ought to go with it, I'll be honest with you.
I agree with
I-
that too. They've
and
got
I
a long
agree.
history with the town.
I agree, because I think that Beacon might come in, this is their best estimate, and their best guess, but they haven't worked with it, where Remington Verdict has. And I think they know the area and the situation better.
I would propose, I'd make a motion that we go with Remington and Vernick for 3 flapper valves. I call them flapper valves, and at
They are
$60,000.
Well, I mean, is it possible to get a revised quote from them fairly quickly about just one flapper valve or one pipe?
Well, he said if he closed off the other two, it'd be the
Yeah,
same price.
We could ask him for one, if that's what your recommendation is, we could do that,
I mean,
but
I'm
I'm not sure how that would work. You'd have to come back and vote. I don't know.
Well, I made the motion that I would go with Remington and Verdict for 3 pipe, 3 valve, $60,000.
I would second that.
I agree.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, well, I guess we'll wait and see what happens on the next date. We don't really need that yet, so we'll wait and see what happens on the next meeting date.
So you just voted on a recommendation for Remington Verdict, and that'll go to the commissioners for the $60,000. And you made a recommendation, Remington Verdict, for the $141,050 for the realigning of Collins Street and Van Dyke. So that'll be put on the
That's correct.
agenda, right, Kate, for the 15th. And then they may ask Remington Verdict to come in, I'm sure they will, to go over their proposals with them, right? Talk about it, and then they'll vote on it.
I would too if I were
Yeah.
them.
All right. I want to make a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I second.
Aye.
All in favor?
I thought it would be longer.